China Merchants Group has officially declared bankruptcy. China Railway bitterly freezes numerous projects. The career of Tianjin Information Technology has come to an end. The blood letter from COFCO has completely destroyed China's economy. The downfall of Xi Jinping's regime is imminent. China Merchants Group, one of the most prominent symbols of China's industrial and economic power, has officially declared bankruptcy, marking a significant and shocking downturn in the nation's once thriving corporate sector. Established in the 19th century, China Merchants Group (CMG) had grown into a colossal enterprise, with its business spanning multiple sectors, including port operations, logistics, financial services, and real estate. For decades, CMG represented the epitome of Chinese success, expanding its global reach and solidifying its position as a dominant force in global trade. However, the winds have changed, and CMG's collapse now illustrates the profound challenges facing China's economy as it grapples with the consequences of the global financial crisis, domestic mismanagement, and shifting international trade dynamics. The downfall of CMG is not an isolated incident but rather part of a broader narrative of financial and industrial turmoil in China. The group's financial health began deteriorating as early as the late 2010s, with cracks in its foundation exacerbated by the global economic downturn that came with the COVID-19 pandemic and later escalated with the ongoing US-China trade war. CMG, heavily reliant on the import-export business, faced an unprecedented decline in the volume of goods being transported globally, which hit its logistics and port operations hard. With the global supply chain becoming more fragmented and unpredictable, China's once dominant position in international trade began to erode, leaving giants like CMG vulnerable. As trade volumes plummeted, so did CMG's revenues. Internally, the situation was no better. Despite being a giant in the industry, China Merchants Group had been suffering from overexpansion and poor financial management. The company's ventures into real estate and financial services, both key pillars of its growth strategy, became liabilities rather than assets. The real estate sector in China, in particular, has been under immense pressure, with prices collapsing across major cities. This contraction hit CMG's real estate holdings, leading to a cascade of losses in both asset values and revenue streams. Financial institutions, wary of the increasing debt burdens and weakening balance sheets, began retracting credit lines, exacerbating the liquidity crisis within the company. Moreover, CMG's competition with domestic players like COFCO Shipping also intensified as the Chinese government redirected resources and support towards other state-owned enterprises. While CMG had previously enjoyed the backing of the Chinese government, the focus shifted to newer, more strategically favored entities. This left CMG exposed and struggling to maintain its competitive edge, especially as international shipping giants like Maersk began to dominate trade routes once controlled by Chinese firms. The financial state of CMG worsened with each passing quarter. Losses mounted from project delays, debt obligations, and rising operational costs, while returns from investments dwindled. By the beginning of 2024, the group's liquidity crisis had reached critical levels. CMG had amassed significant debt from its various expansions, but without the necessary revenues to service these debts, default became inevitable. Efforts to restructure the company's debt through government bailouts and corporate refinancing failed as the sheer scale of CMG's financial collapse overwhelmed any potential solutions. China Merchants Group's declaration of bankruptcy was a major blow not only to the company but also to China's economic reputation. CMG had been a flag-bearer for China's global economic ambitions, and its fall signals a broader crisis of confidence in the country's corporate sector. The financial strain at CMG mirrors the struggles of other large Chinese firms that have overleveraged themselves during years of rapid economic growth, with the Chinese government under pressure to stabilize the economy. The downfall of a major state-owned enterprise like CMG adds to the complexities of managing an increasingly fragile financial system. The effects of CMG's collapse ripple across multiple sectors in China. The logistics and port operations sectors, in particular, are expected to suffer further disruptions as CMG's massive influence in these industries wanes. Its bankruptcy also has significant implications for international shipping and trade, as CMG had a substantial stake in global port operations. Particularly in Africa and Southeast Asia, many of its overseas investments in infrastructure, made under China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative, are now in jeopardy, threatening the continuity of projects that were seen as critical to expanding China's geopolitical influence. Analysts warn that CMG's collapse could trigger a domino effect, where other state-owned enterprises so similarly overextended in foreign investments or domestic sectors could face similar fates. The government's inability to intervene effectively in CMG's case has shaken investor confidence, further damaging China's standing in international markets. The Chinese stock market, already reeling from a series of economic downturns, saw a sharp decline following CMG's announcement, as investors rushed to reassess the viability of other Chinese corporations. The collapse of China Railway Construction Corporation (CRCC), once a cornerstone of China's infrastructure development, has sent shockwaves through both the domestic and global economy. Founded with the mission to build China's massive railway networks and to spearhead infrastructure projects under the Belt and Road Initiative (BRI), CRCC was, for years, a symbol of China's rapid industrialization and global ambitions. However, in recent times, the company has found itself on the verge of disaster, with one major project after another faltering under financial pressure, mismanagement, and the broader economic challenges facing China today. CRCC's downfall is a stark reflection of the difficulties facing China's once booming construction and infrastructure sectors. The company was responsible for many of China's high-profile high-speed rail projects, which were once touted as the hallmark of the country's modern infrastructure prowess. These railways, connecting vast cities and driving economic growth across provinces, have now become liabilities. The financial burdens of maintaining and completing these projects have proven too heavy for CRCC, especially as the company contends with ballooning costs and a decline in domestic demand for large-scale infrastructure investment. Many of the high-speed rail lines that CRCC built have seen far lower usage rates than expected, and the revenues generated from these projects have been insufficient to cover the astronomical costs of construction and upkeep. One of the key reasons behind the collapse of CRCC's domestic projects is the shift in China's economic strategy. After years of pouring funds into infrastructure as a means of sustaining economic growth, the Chinese government has had to pivot away from this model as the country's debt levels soared. The property market, which has been another pillar of China's economy, has also been in sharp decline, leading to less investment in related infrastructure. CRCC, which had heavily relied on government contracts and funding, suddenly found itself without the financial backing it once had. Local governments, struggling with their own debt issues, have been unable to finance the completion of ongoing projects, leaving CRCC with partially finished railways and roads, and no clear path to profitability. Internationally, CRCC has faced even more significant challenges. As one of the flagship companies involved in China's Belt and Road Initiative, CRCC was responsible for building railways, roads, and other infrastructure in developing countries across Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. These projects were not only seen as economically beneficial but were also central to China's geopolitical strategy of expanding its influence globally. However, many of these projects have been plagued by delays, cost overruns, and, in some cases, outright cancellation due to political instability and the inability of host countries to service the debt they had taken on to finance these projects. Countries such as Malaysia and Pakistan have scaled back or renegotiated their BRI contracts with China, directly affecting CRCC's revenue streams and leading to project cancellations. In Africa, where CRCC had a number of major railway projects, the company has faced growing opposition from local governments and civil society groups, who accuse the company of substandard work and inflated costs. These allegations have led to contract disputes and even lawsuits, further draining the company's resources. Moreover, the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated these issues by disrupting global supply chains, leading to even more delays and financial losses. CRCC's failure to deliver on its promises in these international projects has damaged its reputation and strained China's diplomatic relations with key partner countries. The financial situation at CRCC has now reached a critical point. The company is saddled with enormous debt, much of it tied to unfinished or underperforming projects both at home and abroad. With revenues declining and costs spiraling out of control, CRCC has been forced to default on some of its obligations. And the prospects of government bailouts appear increasingly unlikely as Beijing grapples with its own economic slowdown. The Chinese government, once eager to showcase CRCC as a national champion, is now more focused on stabilizing the broader economy and reducing the country's reliance on debt-fueled infrastructure development. What makes CRCC's situation even more precarious is the sheer scale of its operations. As one of the largest construction companies in the world, CRCC's collapse could have far-reaching consequences for the global construction and engineering sectors. Thousands of workers in China and across the world depend on CRCC projects for their livelihoods. And the cancellation or postponement of these projects will lead to widespread job losses. In China, the ripple effects of CRCC's downfall are already being felt in related industries, such as steel production and machinery manufacturing, which supplied the raw materials and equipment needed for the company's construction projects. The demise of CRCC also has broader implications for China's Belt and Road Initiative. With many of the initiative's cornerstone projects now in limbo, China's ability to project its influence through infrastructure development is being seriously undermined. Countries that had previously welcomed Chinese investment in their infrastructure are now reconsidering their involvement. Wary of becoming too dependent on Chinese loans and concerned about the quality and reliability of Chinese-built projects. The collapse of CRCC could serve as a warning to other countries about the risks of partnering with Chinese companies on large-scale infrastructure projects, particularly those tied to the Belt and Road Initiative. The collapse of Tianjin Information Technology Co. Limited, a once prominent player in China's technological landscape, marks yet another critical failure in the country's high-tech sector. As one of the leading companies providing information technology services, software solutions, and technological support, Tianjin Information Technology had enjoyed substantial growth in the early 2000s. It played a vital role in supporting the digital transformation of numerous industries in China, positioning itself as a key player in the nation's tech boom. However, its decline was not sudden. It was a gradual unraveling, exacerbated by a combination of internal mismanagement, mounting competition, and stringent government regulations. Tianjin Information Technology had thrived on government contracts and partnerships with state-owned enterprises, helping to fuel its rapid expansion. The company was integral in supporting various industries, from manufacturing to finance, with cutting-edge IT solutions. But over time, as the Chinese government began tightening its grip on the tech sector, Tianjin Information Technology struggled to keep up. The introduction of increasingly restrictive regulations surrounding data security, privacy, and internet governance put immense pressure on the company to comply. Compliance became costly, not just in terms of finances but also in innovation. As the company was forced to divert resources away from development and into meeting new regulatory standards. This regulatory environment created an atmosphere of uncertainty that discouraged investment and hindered growth across the sector. For Tianjin Information Technology, which was already operating on thin margins, the added financial strain pushed the company towards the edge. The company's inability to adapt quickly enough to the changing legal framework left it exposed, particularly as clients began seeking more flexible and innovative competitors who were better positioned to navigate these regulatory hurdles. Simultaneously, the rise of domestic competition further eroded Tianjin Information Technology's market share. China's tech landscape had become increasingly competitive, with giants like Huawei, Tencent, and Alibaba dominating various sectors of technology. These larger corporations, with vast resources and diversified business models, could afford to invest heavily in R&D and compliance measures, giving them a significant edge over smaller players like Tianjin Information Technology. The company, which had once been seen as a leading provider of IT services, found itself overshadowed by these tech behemoths. One of the key moments in Tianjin Information Technology's downfall was the loss of several high-profile government contracts. These contracts had been the backbone of the company's revenue for years, providing steady income and prestige. However, as the Chinese government began consolidating its tech partnerships, it favored larger and more politically aligned companies. Tianjin Information Technology, despite its long history of service, was left out in the cold. The loss of these contracts severely impacted the company's bottom line, causing a cascading effect of financial difficulties. Compounding these issues, the global technological landscape had also shifted dramatically. With China's growing isolation from Western technology markets due to trade tensions and restrictions, companies like Tianjin Information Technology were cut off from valuable international partnerships and innovations. The company's reliance on imported technology, particularly from the U.S. and Europe, became a liability as sanctions and export bans limited its access to critical software and hardware. This further crippled its ability to innovate and compete on a global scale. As Tianjin Information Technology struggled to stay afloat, the broader economic challenges facing China only made matters worse. The country's slowing growth and the bursting of the property bubble meant that many of the industries that the company served were scaling back their investments in technology. Demand for IT services plummeted, and with its primary clients slashing budgets, Tianjin Information Technology found itself in an untenable position. Efforts to diversify its client base and pivot to new markets came too late, as the company was already deeply mired in debt. By the time the company officially declared bankruptcy, it was clear that Tianjin Information Technology was not just a victim of external pressures but also of its own strategic missteps. The company had expanded aggressively during the boom years, taking on significant debt to fund its growth. But when the market contracted, it had no safety net. The inability to adapt to the rapidly changing tech landscape, both domestically and internationally, left the company vulnerable. What was once a leader in IT services became an example of how quickly fortunes can change in China's volatile tech sector. The collapse of Tianjin Information Technology serves as a broader indictment of the risks inherent in China's tightly controlled and highly competitive technology industry. The company's downfall is a cautionary tale for other mid-sized tech firms in China, many of which are also struggling under the weight of government regulation, fierce competition, and a challenging economic environment. It highlights the challenges that come with navigating a market where political and economic factors are constantly shifting, often at odds with innovation and growth. For China, the loss of Tianjin Information Technology is another blow to its ambitions of becoming a global tech powerhouse. As the country continues to push for technological self-reliance, the collapse of key players like Tianjin Information Technology raises questions about the sustainability of its approach. The Chinese government's heavy-handed control over the tech industry, while aimed at securing data and maintaining social stability, may be stifling the very innovation it seeks to promote. The final announcement from COFCO, China's largest state-owned food processing company, sent shockwaves through an already struggling economy. Known as a titan in the global agricultural market, COFCO's role in securing China's food supply and managing a vast network of international trade routes made it one of the most critical components of the nation's economic engine. However, the company's recent announcement of financial distress not only symbolized its own decline but also underscored the severe structural weaknesses that now threaten to unravel China's entire economic foundation. For decades, COFCO had been the central pillar in China's efforts to maintain food security. The company had built an impressive global portfolio, managing vast tracts of agricultural land, overseeing food production, and controlling a significant portion of China's grain imports and exports. With China's population continuing to grow and urbanization accelerating, COFCO's role was pivotal in ensuring a stable and sufficient food supply for the country. But beneath the surface, signs of trouble had been mounting for years. The global agricultural market had become increasingly volatile due to climate change, international trade disputes, and disruptions in supply chains, all of which began to put immense pressure on COFCO's ability to maintain its operations at full capacity. The company's financial troubles began to surface as early as 2021 when rising global food prices, exacerbated by supply chain disruptions, led to higher import costs. COFCO, which had long relied on cheap imports of grains and other food products, found itself facing unprecedented challenges in securing affordable supplies. The Chinese government, already stretched thin by economic slowdowns and a faltering real estate market, was unable to provide the kind of financial support COFCO needed to continue its operations smoothly. As a result, the company started to experience significant cash flow problems, leading to delays in payments to suppliers and a growing backlog of debt. The situation worsened as global events, such as the war in Ukraine, further disrupted food supplies. Ukraine and Russia, both major exporters of wheat and other grains, were key suppliers to COFCO. With these markets now cut off, COFCO was forced to seek alternative sources at higher prices, driving up costs even more. At the same time, domestic agricultural production within China was struggling due to severe weather conditions, including droughts and floods, which decimated crop yields. COFCO's ability to balance its international and domestic supply chains was further undermined by these compounding factors. In response to these crises, COFCO issued a series of warnings to both the government and the public, outlining the grave situation it faced. However, the company's final announcement, which detailed the extent of its financial collapse, was the tipping point that brought the broader economic consequences into sharp focus. COFCO revealed that its debt had ballooned to unsustainable levels, and without immediate intervention, it would be unable to continue operations. This announcement sent shockwaves not only through the agricultural sector but also through the broader economy, as COFCO's collapse threatened to destabilize China's already fragile food security system. The ripple effects of COFCO's downfall were immediate and severe. As the company halted operations, food prices across China began to soar, triggering widespread inflation. The sudden surge in the cost of basic staples, such as rice, wheat, and cooking oil, hit the poorest segments of the population the hardest. The social unrest that followed further destabilized the country, as protests erupted in various provinces, demanding government intervention. The Chinese government, already struggling to manage a slowing economy and mounting public dissatisfaction, found itself ill-prepared to handle a full-blown food crisis. Moreover, COFCO's collapse had significant implications for China's international trade relationships. Many countries that relied on COFCO for agricultural exports suddenly found their contracts voided, leading to diplomatic tensions. Countries in Africa and Southeast Asia, which had entered into large-scale agricultural trade agreements with COFCO, were particularly affected. These nations, many of which are part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, began to reconsider their partnerships with Chinese companies, fearing that COFCO's failure was a harbinger of further economic instability within China. This further damaged China's reputation on the global stage, particularly as it had been positioning itself as a reliable trading partner and an emerging superpower in international trade. The domestic fallout from COFCO's financial collapse was even more devastating. The company's interconnectedness with other sectors of the Chinese economy meant that its failure had a domino effect, impacting industries from logistics and transportation to banking and finance. As COFCO defaulted on its loans, several major state-owned banks were forced to write off significant losses, further exacerbating the country's already perilous debt situation. The collapse of COFCO became a symbol of the broader financial strain facing China, where state-owned enterprises, burdened with debt and inefficient management, were increasingly unable to adapt to the rapidly changing global economic environment. In the end, COFCO's demise was not just the story of a single company's financial mismanagement but rather a microcosm of the deeper systemic problems facing China's economy. The government's reliance on state-owned enterprises to fuel growth, while successful in the past, had created a bloated and inefficient economic structure that was ill-suited to the challenges of the modern global market. COFCO's collapse laid bare the vulnerabilities in China's food security strategy, its over-reliance on international supply chains, and the broader inefficiencies that plague its state-controlled economic model. The downfall of Xi Jinping's government, once seen as an unshakable political regime, is now unfolding in what appears to be a dramatic and inevitable collapse. For years, Xi Jinping positioned himself as the uncontested leader of China, consolidating power through his anti-corruption campaigns, rewriting the constitution to allow indefinite leadership, and spearheading economic policies aimed at solidifying China's place as a global superpower. But now, as China's economy teeters on the brink of disaster and social unrest grows, it seems that the very foundation of Xi's leadership is eroding at an alarming pace. Xi Jinping's rise to power was built on a mixture of centralized control and grand economic ambitions. His Belt and Road Initiative BRI was a cornerstone of China's foreign policy, designed to expand Chinese influence by funding infrastructure projects across the globe. Domestically, Xi promised to maintain China's impressive economic growth, relying on massive state-owned enterprises so as to drive industrial expansion, technological innovation, and real estate development. However, as recent events have shown, these strategies have begun to unravel, revealing deep-rooted problems that the Chinese Communist Party can no longer ignore. One of the most glaring examples of Xi's failures is the dramatic collapse of key state-owned enterprises like China Railway Construction Corporation and COFCO, which once symbolized China's industrial strength. These companies, heavily indebted and mismanaged, have crumbled under the weight of their financial obligations, sending shockwaves through China's economy. The failure of these once mighty giants has shaken public confidence in the government's ability to steer the nation through its economic challenges, sparking widespread discontent. Xi's economic policies, which once propelled China to record-breaking growth, are now backfiring. His focus on tightening control over various sectors of the economy, particularly technology and real estate, has stifled innovation and investment. The tech sector, which should have been China's golden ticket to future prosperity, has been particularly hard hit. Companies like Tianjin Information Technology Co. Limited, once thriving under the country's tech boom, have collapsed under the burden of regulatory crackdowns and increased state interference. The tightening of censorship, coupled with strict data privacy laws, has alienated foreign investors and stunted the domestic tech industry's growth, causing ripple effects throughout the economy. At the same time, Xi's government has failed to address the growing debt crisis. China's reliance on SOEs to drive growth has resulted in an unsustainable debt burden that now threatens the stability of the financial system. Local governments, encouraged by Xi's infrastructure push, borrowed heavily to fund extravagant projects, many of which are now unfinished or underutilized. This has left provincial governments struggling to service their debt while also coping with slowing economic growth and shrinking revenues. The real estate sector, which was once a reliable engine of growth, has also collapsed under the weight of its own speculative bubble, with property giants like Evergrande falling into bankruptcy and leaving millions of Chinese citizens financially ruined. Social unrest is mounting as the Chinese people begin to lose faith in Xi's promises. Widespread inflation, caused by food shortages and rising prices, has exacerbated the situation. The collapse of COFCO, China's largest food supplier, has sent food prices soaring, disproportionately affecting the working class and rural communities. This has led to protests in major cities like Shanghai and Beijing, where citizens have taken to the streets demanding government intervention and economic reform. For a regime that thrives on control and stability, these protests represent a significant threat to Xi's authority. The unrest is not limited to economic issues. Xi's crackdown on political dissent, which intensified in recent years, has only fueled public anger. His government's heavy-handed approach to suppressing free speech and political opposition has backfired, with dissent now spreading more rapidly through underground networks and digital platforms. Despite the government's best efforts to control the narrative, information leaks and social media posts exposing corruption, human rights abuses, and the mismanagement of public funds have undermined the regime's credibility. The infamous White Paper protests, which began as a movement against the government's stringent COVID-19 lockdown measures, have evolved into a broader anti-government sentiment that continues to grow. Internationally, Xi's foreign policy is also failing. His aggressive stance on territorial disputes in the South China Sea and along the Indian border, combined with China's increasingly hostile rhetoric toward the United States and its allies, has isolated the country on the global stage. Economic sanctions, trade wars, and the decoupling of supply chains are all consequences of Xi's combative foreign policies. China's economy, once integrated deeply into the global trade system, is now facing restrictions and barriers that are crippling its export-driven industries. The Belt and Road Initiative, once heralded as a grand vision for global infrastructure development, is now riddled with stalled projects. Accusations of debt trap diplomacy and the financial collapse of partner countries, all of which have eroded China's global influence. The final blow to Xi Jinping's regime may come from within the Communist Party itself. While Xi has maintained a tight grip on power by purging rivals and installing loyalists in key positions, there are signs that discontent is growing within the party. The economic turmoil and public unrest have weakened Xi's once ironclad control, and rumors of factional infighting have begun to surface. Party elites, worried about the economic fallout and the potential for social instability, may soon decide that Xi is more of a liability than an asset. If this happens, a power struggle could unfold within the party, further destabilizing the Chinese government and leading to Xi's eventual ouster. In the end, the demise of Xi Jinping's government seems inevitable. The combination of economic mismanagement, social unrest, international isolation, and internal political strife has created a perfect storm that even Xi, with all his power and influence, cannot weather. What was once seen as the dawn of a new era of Chinese dominance under Xi's leadership is now rapidly becoming a cautionary tale of how centralized power, unchecked ambition, and flawed economic policies can lead to the collapse of an entire regime. The question is no longer whether Xi Jinping's government will fall, but how long it can hold on before the cracks in China's foundation give way to total collapse.